must pay tribute to people in Newbury, the Strang family, but beyond the committed ones who went through it all with us. Well, one of those, apart from the Strang family, who was really supportive and committed, was Wendy of the Empire Cafe in Newbury. And it has to be said that the cake, we've got a cake made at the Empire Cafe today, and it has to be said that Wendy never banned the Greenham women, even when most of the other pubs, you would walk into a pub and you'd be asked to leave, and that happened even with the cafes as well. But Wendy never banned Greenham women. She always offered support. Even to this day, she's such a firm friend. Thinking of all those years, you know, there were people in Newbury, and I know because when the camp ended, I did stay here in another location and I did work in Newbury, and I did find a different point of view about Newbury, and that actually there were a lot of supportive people who related to me and what had happened here in a very supportive way. And I always remember one homeless man in the hostel that I worked at after the camp ended, and he said to me, when he knew that I was finally leaving and going to North Wales, he said to me, first in, last out. There were a lot of supportive people in Newbury, and just because the ones who were aggressive and hostile got attention, that didn't mean there were other supportive people in Newbury, and a lot of them were very kind and supportive to me even after the camp ended. And I just want to really put that on the record, because I did meet so many of them through my work. Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
Hello, I'm Judith. I came here for the first time in, I think, Easter 1984. I came from Germany because, as has been said, word got round. We had a peace movement as well. Obviously the two parts of Germany were used as the forefront battlegrounds against each other in the Cold War, were prepared for that. And I came here because the idea of a peace camp and a women's peace camp I found particularly attractive. And it is something that how big it was, the energy, that the activities and the non-violent direct action that came from here and was carried out when I was here at Easter. It was daily. You know, somebody would go and cut the fence just like that, you know, as you do in the evening, that sort of thing, or walk round or have endless discussion, because there were soldiers posted all around the base. I think there were British soldiers, or sometimes British and American soldiers, because the American soldiers were considered to be somewhat trigger happy, and the British soldiers were meant to calm them down. And so we'd go round, some of us, and it took forever, and try and talk to every single post. And you could tell when we spoke to them about the nuclear threat. You know, they got a bit like, yeah, but, you know, think of the Russians. Yeah, but, yeah, what about future generations? Think about the dangers. And it's like, it was so clear that they didn't have, I met nobody who really had a good argument for keeping the base going. Nonetheless, it kept going, but so did the camps. And it wasn't just a camp here, there were camps all around. They were named after the colours of the rainbow, and at one point there were more camps than colours of the rainbow, so additional colours were introduced. And yeah, so I came back a few times, and I met some very, very good women here, and what I saw, the determination and the capacity to change something in a non-violent way. But I also believe it's very important that it's direct, has stayed with me, and that is something that the camp has given me. Thank you.
So welcome to everyone here. We have a varied programme of music, and we're starting off in a minute with Helwen Tara Lloyd-Jones, who will be playing 3 pieces of music on the harp. And really, when we were thinking about bringing the harp down here, it was a wonderful idea, so it's even more wonderful to have the harp and to have the harpist here as well. We really thought that playing this music, Helen's been playing the harp for 7 years now, and for me to hear Helwen playing her music here it's such a tribute to the founding of Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, and also a tribute to particular women, in particular Helen Thomas. We have the garden for Helen Thomas here. Helen was killed on August the 5th, 1989 by a West Midlands police horse box as she waited to cross the road. Helen's garden and the plaque to Helen is always here. It's an integral part of the garden. But this music, and one of the pieces of music is called Farewell to a Friend, I had in mind also, as well as Helen, particularly 3 women who aren't here today, but they are very much here in spirit. One of those is Peggy Walford, and her son Brian is here today. And she died, all these 3 women died in 2018. Erica Wilson, and lastly, but certainly not least, Sarah Hipperson. And there's a bench here in the garden in honour of Sarah. And I think it's probably the first time that so many of us who were at the peace camp with Sarah have actually had the opportunity to meet. So the music now is in honour of those 4 women, really very much as a tribute to those 4 women. So the first piece of music is Farewell to a Friend by Fiona Clifton Welker. The second piece of music is Matador's Lament by Fiona Clifton Welker. And the third and last piece of music is Country Dance by Skylar Kanga. So if we can give a very warm round of applause to Helwen Tara Lloyd-Jones.
come to the 40th commemoration, well, the commemoration of the 40th anniversary of this camp. And I have to say, I remember Haelwen, I think she was about 8 or 9 months. Sorry, Haelwen, you were dancing around this fire sculpture at another event earlier, and you were such an adorable baby, and you were smiling. Anyway, I'm going to speak in Welsh for a bit in memory of Helen Thomas. My Welsh isn't terribly good, and there are people here with expert Welsh, but I'm going to do it anyway. So that Welsh is spoken, it was her first language, and also that the march came from Wales that started the Women's Peace Camp. Roedd Helen yn berson ardderchog. Daeth hi yma gyda cymaint o frwdfrydedd dros bopeth ac yn gweithio yn weithgar iawn, a roedd yn hyfryd iawn i'w chael hi yn ein misg ni. Dwi'n ei cholli hi yn ofnadw, a dydd neb oedd yn ei nabod hi yn anghofio hi. Felly, dwi eisiau ni i gyd, pob un ohonon ni oedd yn nabod Helen, jyst i chofio hi fel oedd hi yn berson ardderchog. I was just saying that Helen was so enthusiastic to the cause while she was here, while she lived among us and worked among us. She worked so hard. She translated our booklet, Resist the Military, into Welsh. She was up at Greengate with a typewriter typing away right up to the time when she was killed. And today I want us all, those of us who remember her, to remember her as she was, the lovely sunshine of her being, and let's, for the time being, forget about the tragedy of her death. And also remember Sarah Hipperson, wonderful woman who, she was a Catholic all her life, faithful to her religion, and absolutely fearless, non-violent, direct activist.
With Mike and his Braiddwyd, I have a dream which takes Martin Luther King's words of a world without war, without bombs, without guns, where black and white live in peace.
Like
I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna raise up my voice and sing down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna raise up my voice and sing down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna shout out the call for peace, peace, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna shout out the call for peace, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna join hands around the world, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna join hands around the world, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. we can break the nuclear chain. Jobs, not wars, is our desire. We don't want a nuclear war. We want peace, not mass destruction. Ban the bomb forevermore. Right, I'm hoping that Sue Lent and her son Chris, or maybe Sue Lent on her own, will say something about the original march that started the whole thing. Without them, none of us would have been here, so thanks to them.
So could you speak here for the microphone?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that original march. I mean, I've done so many interviews the last week. It's one of the few people who's around and available who was on the original march, and every single person asked me how long they stayed at the camp and all this. And I feel a bit apologetic saying, well, I didn't actually stay there, and then I have to remind myself that what I actually did and what those other women did was a big achievement, because without that we wouldn't have had the peace camp. That is perfectly true. And I had to push Chris all the way here in the pushchair with those other women and men who walked the peace camp. Wouldn't have been here. I was just laughing, looking around amusedly, and I'm not going to name anybody because it will make people feel awkward, but whenever we do the holding hands bit in the down by the riverside, there are always some people, usually men it has to be said, who look incredibly awkward, and it just reminded me of the whole original march when the first day my husband did the whole day with me and Chris, and he came back for the last day, and I can tell you it was a very different group that he came back to, because on the way, I think somewhere between Bath and somewhere in the lead up to getting to Bath, the Fallout band arrived and jumped out of the van and all started playing their instruments and handed out peace songs, and after that the march was never silent. We sang as we walked. This was even pre-Cork Hockey, and we've been around since 1983, and we sang as we walked, and by the time we got up here the teenage girls were playing their recorders. The scarves we had were, you know, most of us were wearing the skirts. We looked like quite a wild little bunch really, but singing and dancing as we went, and I think that's stayed with me in terms of campaigning ever since. It doesn't have to be all serious and plodding along, and certainly not all shouting through a megaphone. There are all sorts of styles of campaigning, and I think that style was, you know, for me started with that march, which was very different for me in lots of ways. I set off just planning to do the first day. I feel as if I've said this a million times in the last week, but it's true. My dear friend Mary Crofton, very well known to the choir, rang me the night before, and she was planning to meet the march in Newport. I think I'd possibly even forgotten we'd been away from Cardiff, come back, had seen it advertised in the Guardian, probably had thought, oh, I wouldn't be able to go because we're having a baby. But I said, oh, we'll come for the first day, and which is all we planned to do. But I met wonderful women like Marjorie Lewis and Janet Terrell, who also had a baby with her, and Pettit, the main organiser of the march, along with Carmen, who said, you know, you'll be well looked after, do come. And I was made to feel very welcome. And I think being with a group of women, especially mothers who were fearful for the future of the planet, fearful for the future of their children and what world they were bringing their children into, was very, very powerful and a very big driver. And I was reminded, there was a wonderful film on the other night about the Rhondda sisters who went to jail and all sorts. They came from the Rhondda, working class girls, big family, who went, say some of them went to prison. They came up here regularly, they did actions, they set up a peace camp for a week in Porth, young mothers. But I was reminded in that film, which is available on iPlayer, it was on BBC One Wales on one night this week, Wednesday. Only shown in Wales then, but it is on iPlayer. Do watch it. It's called Mothers, Missiles and the American President. But in that film they showed the government advice, which was to make yourself a bunker in case the bomb dropped, which was absolutely ludicrous. And they put out that leaflet, protect and survive, well, we know that is never going to work. So we adopted the title Protest and Survive, and I think by protesting it made us feel that we were doing something. And the awful threat of the cruise missiles coming in, they still came in, but believe me, by the time they came in, everybody knew about them, because the Greenham women had done such a lot once the peace camp started and women came. Women like Mary, wherever she's gone, who joined the camp in 1982. The circling of the base in December 82 was planned by a small group of women. They didn't know how many people would come. We had no social media in those days, no mobile phones, but those women came, 30,000 of them, and circled the base and lit candles, and then there was a blockade the next day. And Greenham Common really became incredibly well known, as we know. I've told this tale quite a few times in the last week as well, but I remember going up to the 60th anniversary of C&D, and Bruce Kent was there, and a friend of ours who's very active in the peace movement, John Potts, introduced me to him. And Bruce Kent took my hand and he said, wherever I went in the world, people always asked me, how are the Greenham women? And I think that kind of sums it up. It became such a symbol of peace and a symbol of women working together and the power of women. And for me, that's something that's stuck with me ever since. The idea that a small group can actually affect a big change, and that women together particularly are very strong and powerful. And some of the women who are no longer with us, like Helen Thomas, like Mary, who I've mentioned, like Marjorie, Sarah Hipperson, the list is endless. Helen John, who lived here for many years, she was a midwife at the time of the original march. She looked after everybody. She looked after me incredibly. I remember her insisting one night when we were on the church floor and I was asleep, and Chris woke up and she picked him up and said, no, you people carried him around. I mean, she was wonderful, Helen John, and she lived here for many years and travelled all over the world, and she lived peace and the peace movement right up to her death, which was only in the last few years. So I want to pay tribute to some of those women and to the spirit of Greenham. You really can't kill the spirit, and Greenham will always live on. Thank you.
Can I just say, there's a birthday woman here today. She used to give us baths when we were dirty, and we were dirty all the time. And we used to go to her house, and she's here. Isabel Strang. You may not be able to get up, Isabel, you're as old as I am. But there she is. And she's here with her 2 daughters and her husband. And really, we couldn't have done without her. She lived in Newbury. They used to spit at us in Newbury. When we went to Isabel's house, we got puds and cake and bars. Everywhere else in Newbury, we were thrown out and spat at. So, bless you. Happy birthday. Everybody's happy? Happy city, Emerald happy city, Emerald happy Isabel, Emerald happy city. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Isabel, happy birthday to you. You may say a few words if you want to.
Oh, well, only a few. Just to say, I gave baths to the women. I was the bath woman. But had to give them a bath, but they gave me so much more. Certain ones in particular which stand out to me. Sarah Hudson, who for me was and still is my movie hero, because I loved her so much. I've loved all the women. I just loved all the women, and I've been so grateful for what they've given me. Because I didn't really learn very much, but we all shared together, and it was just a tremendous experience, never to be forgotten. Being here today, I feel very, very privileged to be here with the fire and with you all. It's just a beautiful place to be, always beautiful here. I'm going to sit in a chair that's been brought by Sarah's son, Alistair. The chair was brought, Sarah's was in her garden. So I'm going to go and sit in that and do a meditation on gratitude. And I think that Helen has just beautiful. I think for me, the heart praying today said it all. You know, the singing, the heart playing, and just being together is just incredibly special. So thank you. Thank you everybody.
I would like to say something. I'm Catherine Jones. I was here as Katrina House from August 1982. The same month Mary came here as well, and I was here August 1982 until February 2000. And I really would like to say something. It's wonderful to hear Sue Lent speak about the march and all that wonderful energy that established Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp. There was also another aspect to the years that followed, and when I look back on those years that followed, what I remember is that for 15 years I was going into prison. Not for 15 years, but over that period of time I was always going to prison for non-violent direct action, and many of the women who lived here had a similar experience. And many thousands of women came here and went into the base. We also took down 5 miles of fence with bolt cutters on Halloween 1983, which, when I look back on that action, it was absolutely such a wonderful action. The information went out to women. 2,000 women came and dressed for Halloween in whatever way was appropriate for them, and the information that was sent out was, bring your black cardigans. Well, black cardigans was code for bolt cutters, and you know, over those years, if you lived here, you always had a pair of bolt cutters. You know, that was what you had, that was your cutlery for living here. And on that occasion, 5 miles of fence, and this is something, came down just before cruise missiles were flown in, and that was such a wonderful action. And my own personal experience was of cutting non-stop for 4 hours, and in the end everyone was being arrested. There was no one around, and I thought, well, has everyone been arrested? And we were determined, and we always were determined, to carry on cutting. And I carried on cutting for 4 hours, and I thought, well, where are they? You know, where are the police? They'd been all over the place, and there was no one around. And eventually an army lorry came from within the base, and I was so exhausted when I was arrested. I just lay on this back of this flatbed trailer, exhausted after 4 hours cutting. And we were all taken, thousands of women, well, up to 2,000 women were taken to Newbury Racecourse. They had to hire the racecourse. They had arrested so many. And I think often in the programmes about Greenham, they often don't talk about the unremitting non-violent direct action that was done from here. And the consequences of that over and over again were prison, whether it was a week in prison or a month. I did 6 months in prison for cutting the fence, and Frances did 6 months in prison. And Sarah Hipperson, on that particular occasion when the fence came down, Sarah Hipperson, shortly after that, was sent to prison, and she did a month water only fast, which was an incredible thing to do. And often when I think about Sarah, she would continue the protest into prison. And what a wonderful act of resistance, non-violent resistance that was. And she was prepared to go to those lengths. I think the other thing about Sarah that she writes in her book is she was very aware that the generation of women, and she was of that generation, the generation of women who went through the Second World War, even as very young women like Teresa, that they had an awareness about what war was, because they had seen the absolute destruction all around them. Peggy Walford, Brian's mother, had survived the Coventry Blitz.
Well, I was at Biggin Hill, where we had the early part of the war, and we saw the flames. We had the incendiary bombs in our garden, and the worst thing of the whole lot was at the end of the war, in the front of the newspapers came all the pictures of the people in the camps, dying, dead. It was just so horrible. So to come to a peace camp was really important. And if she can't find her bolt cutters, I've got them. They're in my studio.
You know, and there were women like Sarah, who'd been a very young woman during the Second World War. Teresa, there was Jane Dennett, who at one point in the early 40s was Miss Newbury, and then she transformed herself in her early 60s into this amazing Greenham woman living here. And she did a lot of litter picking and campaigning, but she also did a lot of cutting the fence down. And that fence that came down, the 5 miles of fence that came down, Halloween 1983, so much came down because for months beforehand, all the restraining wires were being cut on the fence on the outside by women at this peace camp. And Jane Dennett, women used to come here and say to Jane Dennett, "Oh, I've been out, Jane. We cut some of the lower restraining wires, you know, obviously in the dark." And she used to say to them, "Go back out, that's not good enough, we want the top wires." Anyone can do that. My grandchildren can cut the low wires. And, you know, there was a spirit, and I admire those women who went through that war as young women. And yet, like Peggy Walford, Sarah Hipperson, Jane Dennett, and yet they came here, and Teresa, and they came here with such energy in their 50s and their 60s. And they took it on all over again. They took it on in the Cold War because they saw that cruise missiles represented ultimate destruction and madness, mutually assured destruction. And they worked so hard, and we all worked so hard with non-violent direct action. And this camp and this sculpture is just so apt because the fire was the heart of Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, and everything happened around the fire. All the enactments in the evening of the actions, the food preparation, trying to keep warm, trying to survive all the constant evictions. We couldn't have done any of it without the fire. So thank you. It would be nice to hand over to somebody, to one of the women who was also here.
Looks like you're looking at me, Catherine.
Yes, Rosie Bremer.
Thank you. Well, I'm at the other end of the timescale to Sue and her son, because I came in, as Catherine was saying, the media and people in general totally lost interest in the concept of the nuclear deterrent or nuclear threat. But for me as a child, I was growing up with that threat hanging over me, and I always thought that's a completely crazy situation. And I very much opposed all nuclear weapons. So I came here when I was 18. I'd done a bit of campaigning, but it was terribly, terribly boring. You trudge around asking for signatures to a petition that went off goodness knows where. But then I came here and I found the women like Catherine and others who've been keeping this camp going consistently, and with nothing other than the power of their voices, the songs, their brains, the fire that they lit, the sky above them and the earth beneath them. Every day they oppose the world's most powerful military, and the military couldn't cope with it at all. And I think that is a dynamic that people don't talk about, A, because they're not that interested, but also because they just don't understand it. In a way, it's too big for their brains to cope with. But I very much wanted to be part of it. I'm very glad that I was, and I thank you to everybody who enabled and supported my very, very, very small role in a really big historical, geopolitical, military event. Thank you.